Welcome to the Inside Pitch. I'm Christopher Lockhart, the creator and administrator of this private Facebook group where screenwriters, creatives, filmmakers meet to ask and answer questions and exchange ideas and information on the craft and business of movie making. I am joined as always by my co-administrator at the Inside Pitch, who of course also serves as co-host, the wonderful Ramesh.
Hey everyone, hey Chris. Happy.
Ramesh, you seem so your exuberance and energy level is so high. I mean, my God, I don't know what to do with all this energy. It's nuclear. I know you had a tough day yesterday, right?
It was a rough day yesterday.
All right, well, we're going to try to make it a little better today with our special guest. Who is here to talk about something that is very important. And we'll get to that in a moment. Is there any kind of housekeeping we need to do?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, good. I just wanted to say that next week, we're doing something a little different. Sarah Elizabeth Timmons of No Film School, No Trust Fund, No Problem is going to show us how to do a pitch deck, because I know that so many people in this group want to know about pitch decks. That's going to be a live seminar that is done off the group via Zoom, and I'm going to send out invitations today, and it will be posted on the group page as well. So if you're interested in learning how to create a pitch deck, then you're going to want to meet with Sarah Elizabeth Timmons in this free workshop that she has put together for us at the Inside Pitch exclusively. She also, Ramesh, contributed to our logline pitch contest package, So
exactly, yes.
So she's been a great supporter, and I appreciate her. Thank you. So hello to everybody.
Speaking of which, just one thing. We need to set up. We will be meeting with those winners soon, right?
Oh, of course. Yes. We will be starting our class of 2023 for the 6 finalists, because we're adding one in, if you recall. And so we'll be reaching out to them soon. It's been a very busy week, Ramesh.
It has.
So I haven't had the chance to do a lot of stuff. Right.
I think I read like 6 or 7 scripts and
it's been I read that many scripts yesterday. I mean, it's been pretty crazy. So let's just say hello to people very quickly. As always, if you're logged into StreamYard, then I can see who you are on my panel. If you're not logged in, you just pop up as Facebook user, so you're anonymous to me. But there are a few people like Andrew Soko from London. Thank you, Andrew. It's nice. Bruce Gordon, of course. We love Bruce. Been around since the beginning. James J. Dennis Coleman, our Grim Reaper. Janet Book Goodman. Hello to all of you people. And
I see Phil's there too.
Phil, we love Phil. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Buster Keaton. Is that it? That's all you see?
Savannah is there.
Savannah from Europe. Look at this. We got people
Scotland.
From all over the place. Scotland, the same thing. All right, so you guys can start to put your questions in the box, and Ramesh will monitor them. But Ramesh, why don't you tell us who's here today?
Okay, today we have ERIK BORK, who won 2 Emmy Awards and 2 Golden Globe Awards for his work as a writer-producer on the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers and From Earth to the Moon, both with executive producer Tom Hanks. ERIK had worked as one of Tom Hanks's assistants prior to being given these opportunities, which launched his career as a screenwriter. He went on to sell original series pitches to various broadcast networks, writing series pilots, for them, and also working on the writing staff of 2 primetime drama series. He has written a variety of TV and film scripts for companies such as Imagine Entertainment, TNT, and Universal. He also has taught the UCLA Extension's Writers Program and National University's MFA program in professional screenwriting, and mentored hundreds of screenwriters around the world. He also has been called one of the top 10 most influential screenwriting bloggers for his Flying Wrestler site. His 2018 book, The Idea, The 7 Elements of a Viable Story for Screen, Stage, or Fiction, is a multi-category Amazon bestseller. ERIK, welcome. Where's
Hey
everyone?
everyone.
There
Hey,
he is.
so happy to be here with my old friend Chris, whose blurb is on the back of that book, which has been eternally helpful in marketing it. Hey everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Good morning. Good morning. Well, you know, Eric and I were teaching colleagues for almost a decade, and so you know we got to know each other, and people in the Inside Pitch know that I love the idea, and I have been trying to get Eric on this stream for a year, but he's a very busy man. So, but he's very much in demand, certainly by us, and so we are glad that he's finally here. And you heard his resume. We could do an entire stream talking simply about his career up to the idea. And maybe we'll do that in the future. You know, a couple of, oh, I think I see an Emmy in the, oh, I see an Emmy in the background. They're here. Let's just, for a second, let's check it out. There it is. Very nice. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot to talk about there. Maybe some people will have questions regarding that, but I really do want to talk about the idea because I love this book because I say often that I believe most screenplays go sour at the idea stage, and then sadly the writer goes off and spends 6 months to a year writing 120 pages based on an idea that just simply doesn't work. And if they had only read Erik's book, they would have the litmus test to sort of test the idea. Does the idea stand up? And Erik has come up with a very clever way, 7 elements, which are actually quite clever, Erik. The way, because it must have taken you years to come up with the P, the R, the O. I mean, right? I mean, could you just, like, I could just imagine myself go, oh my God, a P. What could the P be? Maybe I should use another word like dumb.
He's stuck on the M at the end. He's like, exactly, I only have an M, not an M.
Right. So why don't you talk just a little bit about the evolution of the book and sort of how you came up with the problem idea and sort of maybe you also could just pitch the book in a nutshell as well.
Yeah, sure. In my career as a screenwriter, I certainly learned that, you know, an idea that your agents want to take out to the world is not the easiest thing to come up with, even when you have agents. And, you know, I used to pitch, they used to just say, you know, send us log lines, send us an email with a couple sentences of series ideas. There was a period where I was pitching series ideas to the networks as my main thing. I had to sell at least one a year to kind of make my nut. And if it got produced, great. If it got on the air, which that never happened, but even better. But so I would send all these ideas and they would kind of shoot them down or ignore most of them. You're in the agency business, Chris, you know how terrible they are. But and I started to realize that, yeah, they can tell, and not that they're infallible, but they do kind of know what can work with the networks, you know, that's their business, right? So they can look at a couple sentences and go, okay, does this have elements that I think we want to encourage this client to move forward with it, right? So on the professional screenwriting side, I definitely saw that. But also as I started teaching screenwriting and mentoring writers, what I would see is most people would send me a finished script and they would want notes on the script. And 99% of the most important notes were notes I would have had on the basic idea if they'd brought it to me before they wrote it, right? All the scene writing notes are less important, right, than the bigger foundational choices that you make at the beginning. And what I found, I do this as a writer and all writers do this, we want to jump into scene writing as quickly as possible because that's the actual script. That's the part people are going to read. And so we tend to sign off on an idea that we're going to write without putting it through the same amount of scrutiny as we would the finished script, let's say, if we started sending the script off to people. It's an understandable thing. But what I've come to believe and realize is that the most important determining factors of whether a script is going to work are those early decisions. In the book, I say it's something like 60%. and then maybe 30% structure choices, scene by scene outlining, and 10% the words on the page. That doesn't mean all those things don't have to be professional level. It just means what's the most important determining factors to something being successful. And I think so much of it is in the idea. The idea is not just a sentence long log line. The idea is basically your pitch for your story that you could do in a short form, but that isn't scene by scene or even act by act necessarily. It's more just, here's the central problem of the story. Here's the main character. Here's what they're doing to try to solve the problem. So, so problem is the acronym that I use in the book, PROBLEM. The 7 elements all begin with one of those letters, because I think story at its heart is about a problem that somebody's trying to solve, that you hope the audience and the readers get emotionally invested in. That's really the name of the game. So what kind of problem can get an audience emotionally invested and keep them invested is really the question. And so I came up with these 7 items. We can go into them in any detail if you want, but it's punishing, relatable, original, believable, life-altering, which speaks to the stakes, entertaining, and meaningful. And so you're kind of looking to sort of hit all 7 of those. And the difficulty is sometimes if you go really hard in one direction, you can lose the other. Like the most entertaining script may not be as believable. It has to still be believable while also being entertaining. And so it's a balancing act, but it's also thinking about your story through a variety of filters, each of which isn't the easiest thing to come up with something that fully works, let alone works in all 7 areas. So that's the basic premise. We can go deeper into it, but the book is chapter by chapter, one for each of those 7 elements is the bulk of the book.
And so would you say that one is more important, or are they all equal?
I think it's weird to say, but they're kind of all equal. It's kind of like they all matter, although you can see certain movies that will get by with certain ones and not as much others. Like, for instance, Top Gun Maverick, super over-indexed on entertaining with the flight footage, maybe isn't as meaningful, as original, as some movies, for instance. I would say the one that scripts fall down on a lot is believable. People just assume everything is believable and it's easy to make an audience buy into something. But I think it's harder than it looks, especially if you have any kind of fantastical elements in your script. But even if you don't, I think the thing that tends to make scripts stand out to managers and agents and industry people the most from new writers is authenticity, is having a voice that is original, which is a different element, original, believable, but also that the writing is so authentic and so sucks the audience into the realness of the characters and the situations in the world that makes people go, wow, this person must have lived in that world. Like it just feels so real, so true, or just real to human nature, real to how human beings would behave in a given situation. Having said that, life-altering stakes is a huge one, because a lot of times a script just doesn't have big enough stakes or isn't a punishing enough situation as the main character is trying to solve the problem. One thing I'll say is that I find point of view, which the relatability one really is about, a lot about point of view and making the audience invest in a character, is another really big issue in scripts. The way I look at it is a story has one main character. That main character has a particular thing they're focused on throughout the story that takes the whole story to resolve. You can have more than one story in a movie, meaning more than one main character. But what I think can be detrimental in scripts is when you cut around to different characters that aren't the main character, even though none of them have their own story that the audience can really invest in. Or if you're just generally not telling them things subjectively from the point of view of the main character, but you're more at an objective distance, describing a bunch of people doing a bunch of things, and the reader's like, why do I care? The reason they usually care is because an individual person in a story has enough going on that they understand and bond with that makes them really want to see how it turns out, whatever that character is dealing with. And then you can multiply that by 2, 3, 4, 5 in some movies, and in most TV series, you have multiple stories going on in any given episode.
So what I find sort of ironic about the whole problem essence of the book is that when I read screenplays, especially from new writers, the problem that they have at the center of the script either isn't particularly interesting, or it's too internal, or it's just simply not fortified enough. Or I just think that a lot of writers don't understand that a character needs to have a problem.
Yeah, and not an internal one. I mean, that's another thing that we all get confused with a little bit as writers. A lot of times writers are more interested in the internal character arc stuff, which is important most of the time, but usually that has to be secondary in your pitch, your log line, and in your script, really, to the external stakes. Now, in a book or a play, maybe you can get by on something that's a bit more internal, but in a writing for the screen, you generally need external life circumstance stakes that are massive, not necessarily life and death, but feel almost like life and death, especially in a movie or like a drama series. In certain genres, comedies don't need life and death stake, but the characters still need to have something at stake that really matters to them in their future life and isn't just how they think and feel in some way. So yeah, external stakes, which is the life altering, the L in problem, and also the main character actively trying to solve it. If they're not actively trying to solve it, they don't have that agency and they don't have that intense focus on, I'm going to solve the problem, I'm going to reach the goal. The audience doesn't have that thing to root for, kind of. So, and that actively trying to solve the problem needs to generally not work in the middle of the story and only lead to complications, which punish the main character, because we tend to like seeing people struggling and, you know, in difficulty, grasping for anything, trying to get somewhere, and the odds are stacked against them. That tends to be the most compelling type of story. So whatever the genre. So I liken it to, if you're a sports fan, you know, watching your favorite sports team in the most important game ever, where they're the underdogs and everything goes wrong, but there's a come from behind victory. I mean, most movies kind of feel that way, you know, and you want the audience to have that similar stance. If they're watching this on a screen and going, go, go, oh my God, go, oh no, this happened, but I hope they can still pull it out, you know, that's the same entertainment energy that an audience has when they're watching a game.
Yeah, and you know, also I think another reason why you want the problem to be so strong is because it is the choices that the character makes in the pursuit of solving that problem that determines who the character is. Because in drama, that's really how we determine character. It's based on the choices that they make. And so the more extreme the problem, then perhaps the more extreme the choices have to be. It's always a lot more interesting when you're sitting out in the theater and you're asking yourself, gee, what would I do if I were in her place? I would never have done that. And so it really is about the choices. That's how characters are made in drama. I think too many people think that, oh, well, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a page describing how the character dresses, and that will reveal character. And while that certainly adds texture to the character, in drama, as opposed to writing a novel, you are determining and creating character based on the choices that they make in response to this problem that they have to solve, which is why the problem is so important in the script.
Yeah, and it has to be so life altering and so much has the main character's focus that they really can't deal with anything else until they solve this problem. And the whole story is about, can they solve this problem? And ideally, the average scene, what I thought of when you said, you know, describing costumes and dress and stuff. Another thing that I often find myself telling people is the ideal template for a scene is kind of like a story in miniature. You have a clear main character in the scene with a clear want who's actively pursuing that want and running into conflict as they do. And that conflict forces them to improvise and try different things. And that builds over the course of the scene. Just like in a story, the conflicts build over the course of the story until they resolve in the end. At the end of the scene, there's a resolution that is also usually some kind of turn that changes the status of whatever that problem is in the story and births new scenes. a lot of times what I see are scenes, and I'm sure I've written them too, where people are just kind of talking, but in a low conflict way, where there is no one character who's pursuing an agenda in that scene. And again, you want to root for the person with the agenda that you hopefully care about to move forward in whatever it is they're trying to do. Whether you fully agree with it or not, you're invested. You want to see what happens, and you want the scenes to be about that. So it's not about giving information to the audience. It's about dramatizing a struggle in pretty much every scene. Someone's trying to solve a problem in pretty much every scene. That tends to make the scenes most compelling. And usually the person trying to solve a problem is the main character of that story, who you're tracking from scene to scene as their attempts to solve it evolve and build.
Right. And there is a major problem that the character is trying to solve that won't be resolved until the end of the movie. But in pursuit of trying to solve that major problem, many problems erupt. And so the character then also has to put out those smaller fires in the pursuit of eventually extinguishing the much larger fire in the climax of the movie. And to me, it all seems very basic. You know, you watch any movie, you can see this, but why do you think it gets lost on writers? What? Do you have any idea, sort of, you know, what the disconnect is?
Well, as a writer myself who's struggled with this and has been doing it for decades, and, you know, writing is still my main thing. Yeah, I mean, especially in my early days, but even now, first of all, professional writers make it look easy. And although we watch stories all the time and we're always seeing this same kind of stuff in the stories we watch, we're usually not analyzing it and breaking it down and realizing, oh, this is why this affected me. This is why I was drawn into this story. And so when we write something, we don't necessarily have all those kind of criteria in our mind unless we really reverse engineered our favorite movies and sort of figured it all out. And that's a lot of what I've been doing and what the book, you know, does. It's years of that kind of work to go, you know, it looks easy when we see it, but it's not easy to do it. It's not easy to get an audience caring about a character. It's not easy to come up with a problem to base a movie on that's original and will grab people. And
keep the story afloat for 120 pages.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah. It's just hard to do well, I think. It's harder than it looks.
It's much harder than it looks.
Yeah.
So could you perhaps, just because you kind of mentioned Top Gun Maverick, could you potentially go through the 7 steps? You don't have to go through them in great detail, but just perhaps choose a movie. Could you just say, okay, so, you know, the P, the R, the O, the B, for perhaps one film, just kind of so our audience can kind of get the idea of it?
Not that film, though.
Any film you want.
Because I actually did analyze Top Gun Maverick for my online course and community that I have recently, because people voted on it and wanted to hear. So that's like fresh in my mind. So there's a problem that's going to take the whole movie to solve, which is that they have to go on this mission, and it's going to be a very difficult mission, right? It's so difficult that it's unlikely to succeed without a bunch of them dying, right? So that gets the audience invested, hopefully, in those life-altering stakes. You know, you're told that it's important to America, even though you don't know who the enemy is, and you just buy into it and go, okay, I guess this has to be done. And they're going to do it, but they're probably going to die and fail in the doing of it. And so the audience has this thing to root for. Can they do this mission successfully or not? Can Tom Cruise train and lead this group of pilots to successfully undertake this mission? So that's the problem. And there's sub problems within that, like the relationship with Rooster that Maverick has, who is Goose's son, who doesn't like him because he stood in the way of him being a pilot for a while, etc. And will Rooster be on this mission and do well? And will the two of them reconcile their differences? Is kind of a sub story, maybe like a B story. But the A story is training these pilots to do this mission. So is it punishing? Yes, it's punishing because it's going to be so hard to carry out this mission that the training along the way is going to have a million mishaps, a million near misses. People could die in training. They keep discovering that it's just so hard to pull this off. And meanwhile, Other things happen that make it difficult for Tom's character, like the bosses not being on his side and the relationship with Rooster, etc. And so we're focused on, it's a problem to try to do this that's punishing him until the very end when he can carry out the mission successfully. So in terms of relatability, you're meant to relate to his character primarily because it's told through his perspective, where relatability just means the audience puts themselves in the main character's shoes and the story is told subjectively from that main character's point of view. You know him better than the others. You look through him and at the other characters. It's not an intense immersive character study, this kind of movie, but they do enough, I think, in the beginning to get you, they're trying to get you on his side. The guy who the bosses are treating badly, who, is living this quiet life and who has had these difficulties moving forward in his, I guess, career, even though he's the best pilot and everything, and that he's making the right choices, but the people are tough on him, and he's had losses in his life, which makes you relate to him, and he's alone in his life, and he's got the goose memory and the rooster relationship. So all these things are meant to get you emotionally on his side, and then he's given this job, but they don't really believe in him. And he's got people that he's got to train who aren't immediately on his side either. So when you give a character problems and difficulty and people not treating them well and them having things that didn't go well in their life, all of those things help with relatability potentially. But most of it is about just staying in his point of view and focusing on scene by scene. What is he doing to try to solve the latest iteration of the problem or the latest sub problem that is part of the bigger problem? In terms of originality, it's obviously a sequel. So PRO is originality. It's a sequel, so it's not really original. It doesn't really need to be original. The whole point is that it's a follow-up to the first movie, but it's also trying to find an original story, which I'm sure they spent years, and I know many writers, to find what's the cool new way to do a Top Gun story updated to today's world. And so the premise isn't completely original. And some people even said, well, that mission they go on, isn't that kind of like the Death Star mission? A lot of it, so it's not really super original, but at least they found a new story to tell that's sort of in that world for that character. Believable, I mean, I think the execution of the military stuff, if you were an actual pilot, you probably find a lot of stuff that's not very, very believable. I don't think the kind of Simpson Bruckheimer world is known, or the Michael Bay type world. Not that he was involved in this, but like when we did Band of Brothers, Pearl Harbor was out there, and that was kind of like the opposite way of doing a war movie, right? You have the popcorn version, which is probably playing very fast and loose with how things really work, and then you have the supposedly more accurate, authentic version, which is what we were trying to do with Band of Brothers, even though there's still compromises there. So it's believable enough, I think, for the average audience to go, okay, this is how these fighter planes work. I mean, there's certainly a lot of research and stuff. I don't know if the specifics of it all would pass muster with an expert, but do they really need to? Probably not. They just work for an audience. So nothing in that that's horribly unbelievable. Life-altering stakes, absolutely. People are going to die. Is it entertaining? Absolutely. That's the thing that it's most going for. So PROBL, life-altering stakes. E is entertaining. That's the thing that it's really over-indexing on. When something is super, super entertaining, you can often sacrifice some of those other elements, but it has to be really entertaining within a certain kind of genre, which this is. People watch this movie because they want to see these incredible flight sequences. That's really what it's all about. And they give you plenty of them, and they are entertaining to watch. And then last one, M, is meaningful, really speaks with themes. And it's shooting for some meaningfulness in terms of, his life choices, his relationship with women, his relationship with Rooster especially. Is it right or wrong for him to have held him up because that's what his mother wanted, but he never told him because he didn't want him to turn against his own mother? To me, theme is usually about competing goods or competing evils, values being weighed against each other that don't have easy answers, but where there's some nuance and some gray area. And so I guess the main place they're looking for that I can think of off the top of my head is the question of, did he make the right choice regarding Rooster? Has he made the right choices in not telling him, et cetera? And in encouraging him and having him be part of the mission, but then arguably Rooster maybe isn't really right for the mission, and is that good for the rest of the people on the mission, et cetera, et cetera. So questions about the right way to behave in a certain situation is where the theme stuff, I think, comes out. So that's a quick 7 Elements. There's probably, you give me another movie that I've seen, I could probably do it for that too, but that one is top of mind. So there you go.
No, it's great. And are there movies where the idea just didn't work? It doesn't work? That if you look at your PROBLEM, that it falls short of these?
Well, 100%. Yeah. I mean, most movies I see, I generally don't love. And there's usually, I can usually explain it in terms of those elements, you know, and the thing is, the reason people often say, well, if it's so hard to break into be a screenwriter, you have to be so much better than like the bulk of people trying to do it. Why are there all these like quote unquote bad movies that get made? And I always have to explain those are apples and oranges. The reason, as you well know, Chris, movies get made has to do with a lot of other things besides, was this the greatest script ever? And also it's hard to write a great script. It's even for professionals. It's hard and rare for lightning in a bottle to happen in a movie to be great, or a TV show. But just because a movie didn't work doesn't mean that the writers employed on that movie didn't have to really rise to the top of their class to break in the first place, and don't have a lot of talent. It just means there are a lot of reasons why a script can go wrong and a movie not work, or get made despite issues with the script that have to do more with, you know, commercial business reasons, and whether there's a star behind it or a big producer or director behind it, or whether it feels like it's going to make money despite not being the greatest script, which some movies do. So I don't know if you're looking for me to analyze a particular movie that didn't work. I can try and look for a list of recent movies that I didn't like to see if I can do that. I have a little spreadsheet I'll pull up.
All right, well, go ahead. But because, you know, I know that a lot of the members are going to.
That might take me a minute.
Sure, of course. A lot of our members are going to want you to break down a million movies. And what I say is to the members, get the book and break the movies down yourself. You know, that's seriously, that's
right.
The whole idea of the book, because you need to know how to do this.
Or break down your own scripts.
Yeah, break down your own scripts. Don't worry about some movie that you just saw that you love.
Right.
Think about your own damn script and break that down and see how your idea holds up. That's what I would say.
I see someone, I haven't seen Tar yet. I see someone was asking about doing it. I don't know if you want me to look at the questions here, but I think someone's asking about, can you do this with a TV show too? Which certainly I could. I might need to be prompted with a show that we all can agree is worth talking about that I've seen. I mean, The White Lotus is one that comes to mind, which I really enjoyed recently, but I don't want to give away any spoilers.
But generally speaking, yes, of course, you can use the problem, the 7 elements, for any idea, for TV, for a book, for screenplay. It makes sense to use it as a reference for anything that you're writing. That's character based.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, TV is different in certain ways in terms of obviously how it's broken down. And one of the big ways it's different is it tends to be multiple character stories within any given episode. And that you have long stories that stretch over many episodes or even the entire series. That's one version of story in TV, but the more important version is in a particular episode, you also need a beginning, middle, and end to whatever problem is part of that episode for whatever characters have such a problem, usually more than one, so that it feels like it's a complete hour viewing or complete half-hour viewing experience. Although TV these days more and more is serialized to where you really kind of watch the whole series or the whole season. And they do connect very much from episode to episode. And there's a big emphasis on what's going to happen at the end of the season for all these characters, especially in limited series, which are more like features, like The Dropout or White Lotus, where you're telling an 8-hour or 10-hour story, or Band of Brothers. But within each hour, this is the thing writers often tend to miss, they're not just chapters of an 8 or 10-hour story. They're standalone 1 hours that have a beginning, middle, and end in a 3-act structure, and probably multiple stories even within that hour that each have a beginning, middle, and end, so that the audience feels like they've been taken on a narrative journey that's come to some completion, even if the longer stories that the series is going to explore are ongoing. So you're operating on different levels in TV, the episode level, the season level, the series long level, and usually more characters getting stories, which can make television more difficult, and also more difficult to break into, because when the industry buys a TV idea, they're buying the writer and their track record and their vision for the whole thing, not just a script. Whereas in movies, you can just buy a script. You don't care who the writer is. If the script works, you're off to the races. So.
Good point. But even TV series that have a lot of characters, still many of them have one character that is centralized.
Yeah, I mean, or is a little bit more central than the others. But like Sex and the City, Carrie was like the most important, but the other three always got a story in every single episode. You have 4 stories in every single episode. But yeah, it depends on the show. That it varies, but that is often the case, that there's one main person, like in House or Buffy the Vampire Slayer or something, but secondary people also get stories in any given episode.
Sure. And understandably so when you're trying to expand an idea for 5 years. So yeah, Ramesh, what's going on with questions?
Okay, so someone wants to know, when reading a script, at what point do you know you've got a winner? And when in writing or rewriting, when do you know you're done?
Well, in reading a script, I mean, certainly when you're reading the first like 5 to 10 pages, you can tell if you're in really good hands in terms of the professional level of the scene writing and the opening pages, which is why a lot of times people can know in 5 to 10 pages, I'm not going to keep reading because I know I'm not in good hands. That doesn't mean you can tell if the story's a winner, though. It just means the writer's writing at a high level in terms of their execution of scenes on the page and drawing you in emotionally and doing all the things you want to do well in the opening pages. But you kind of have to read the whole script, I think, or see a pitch for the whole script to know if you think it holds up as a quote unquote winner. The other was, how do you know when you're done when you're writing? I mean, you never do. You're never really done as a writer. I mean, you're only as done as the next set of notes you got that made you realize you're not done. Whether those notes are from yourself because you put it away for a while and came back to it with new perspective, or those notes are from someone whose opinion you trust, or from someone whose opinion you have to listen to because they're paying you or they're going to produce it if you do the notes. And so, there are different stages of doneness. When I write a script, I'll write it until I feel done with it for myself for now. Then I'll put it away and not show it to anyone. A couple months later, I'll reread it and I'll have more notes for myself and I'll rewrite it. And then that version I might show to people, but then they'll have notes and then there'll be another rewrite and rinse and repeat. That just seems to be the process.
Okay.
And professionals, that's what they go through when they're doing it, when they're being paid by somebody to write something. That same thing happens, with the people that you're working with and for constant notes.
Yeah, it's like even a movie's never really done, right? Because you can even when it's in the can, even when it's been produced and distributed and it's 25 years later, you can look at the movie and say, oh God, I wish we had done this. I wish we had done that. So, yeah. Go ahead, Ramesh.
Can you, in your intro to your book, you talked about the lack of professional level execution. Can you talk a little bit about that?
The lack of professional level execution.
You find, yeah.
I'm not remembering the exact reference there, but
Eric, didn't you read your book?
It's been a while. I'm assuming that I was talking about execution on the page. Usually when I say execution, I'm not talking about the overall idea. I'm talking about how it's executed in the scene writing. And so, yeah, it's true. Like, it's kind of like what I was just saying about when a professional reads the first 5 or 10 pages of a script, they can usually tell right away if they're, quote, in good hands, meaning is there professional level execution or not? And that execution has to do with a few different factors. The how much you're focusing on getting you invested or intrigued with a particular character and their situation, how much it feels original but yet believable at the same time, how much the scene writing focuses on problems and conflict in a believable, interesting way, how much the scene description is drawing you in a vivid way, and feels, how easy it is to read. A really professional level script is easy to read, fun to read, a joy to read. It's not just a workman-like listing of now we see this and now we see that. It's taking the audience the reader on a bit of a ride, so that it's fun to get to know these characters. And the professional screenwriter tends to be kind of speaking or guiding the reader through what they're introducing them to, kind of holding them by the hand, almost like speaking directly to them, as opposed to this kind of dry, distant, objective sort of just this happens and this happens and this happens. It's kind of like a professional realizes how much they're communicating with and trying to draw in a stranger who's reading this. And you're not speaking exactly directly to them, but you're writing it in such a way that the average person reading it is like sucked in. And it's like hard to say exactly how you do that. But that's really the goal. And I think so much of what makes writing hard is that it's hard when you're writing something to put yourself in the shoes of like the average person reading it, especially like the average professional person in the industry reading it, and going, how do I make them care? How do I make them lean in? How do I make them start to invest, start to want to keep turning the pages? And that's a very external sort of way to write too. It's like, you probably don't want to start with that. You want to start with, what am I passionate about? What do I think the story is? What do I think are the best scenes? But then in the execution of those scenes in the opening, you do have to kind of at a certain point take a step back and go, what's that person reading this? It's like, how are they reacting? You're really keeping the reader in mind. So like, it's hard to say exactly how one does that, but if you read professional scripts, like scripts that got produced or that made it onto the blacklist or something, I think you tend to see how writers are doing that when they're writing at a very high level. And so you feel like, okay, I'm drawn into this in the first few pages compared to my friend's unprofessional script, let's say, because you look at your own, you don't have the right perspective on that. But looking at some other script from someone who's trying to break in, who isn't writing at that level, again, it's like you can reverse engineer. What is it about this professional one that makes me want to keep reading? What is it that makes me feel like I'm being led into something in a really immersive and pleasurable way, as opposed to I'm kind of at a distance and I don't really get it, or I'm not really that interested yet. It's hard. It's not to do it at a very high level is hard.
What are some of the, speaking of, writers trying to break in, when you read scripts by writers who are trying to break in, aspiring writers, what are are there common issues you find in all of them? And what are some of those?
To me, the most common issues are the ones that I think I've said already. The problem's too internal, as Chris said, there's not enough clear point of view. We're jumping around to different characters. We're not subjectively in one character. The scenes aren't filled with conflict where a character's trying to solve a problem in every scene. Obviously the problem elements of the book, those 7 elements, aren't being, hewed to from scene to scene. And in the first 10 pages, another common thing I see is people feel like they want to give the audience some massive hook at the beginning, which sometimes can work, but I think the most important function of the first 10 pages is to introduce the main character in their ordinary world over time, where you're slowly seducing, as Michael Haig says in Writing Screenplays That Sell, you're seducing the reader to start to be interested in this character and invested in this character, and it takes some time. You don't want to have the character be having events that really change their normal life usually until after the first 10 pages. You want to just show what the normal life is, not tell it through dialogue, but show it in scenes that have some conflict to them, where you can't help but be on the main character's side as they're dealing with whatever difficulties usually they're dealing with in their normal everyday life, where you take the time to show where they live, where they work, their loved ones, their love life, their extracurricular activities, all the things that are the most important aspects of their life that you need the audience to get to start to understand through seeing it illustrated, not hearing it talked about. So many times scripts open and jump quickly to some like big exciting event, but the audience doesn't really get the character yet, isn't inside the character, or we're jumping around to different characters instead of like immersing the audience in one character's perspective. Now, stories that have more than, movies or TV scripts that have more than one character that you're going to tell a story for, you need to do that multiple times. You do need to move back and forth, but with each one, that's what you're trying to do, is get the audience really on board with that character. Movies that have big openings, like, like Saving Private Ryan is a classic example. That opening does hook the audience with something really, action-packed, but it also at the same time is showing the main character's kind of ordinary life right now prior to the catalyst. The catalyst is they get the mission to go save Private Ryan. The ordinary life prior to that catalyst is we're fighting in World War II, and this is just part of our ordinary life, as wild as it is. So you can have a great, exciting opening if it is part of the main character's ordinary life. But I think the main goal is to show that ordinary life, and writers usually feel like they have to jump past that because that's not exciting enough. And I totally disagree with that.
Thank you. Somebody is asking an interesting question. It says, "Hi, bought your book yesterday. If you could replace punish in problem, by what word would you replace it with? It will help me understand because she's French."
Difficulty, constant difficulty. The other thing I would say that punishing goes hand in hand with that, if problems started with an A, I might have said something like agency or activeness, because so much of it is the main character has agency and is active in trying to solve their problem. They have the ability to affect their world, even if the thing they really want seems distant and difficult to achieve, which it should. So they're actively trying to do something, but the world is responding back in ways that cause them to have more problems, more struggle, more difficulty. So punishing is just about the struggle, the difficulty, the problematic nature from scene to scene of the main character's situation. You want to see them like underwater, drowning, almost like you beat up your main character, you put them in a hellish situation. You almost can't make them suffer too much, as long as they do have agency and they are actively trying to resolve things and are causing things to happen as they do that. Because if they don't and they can't, it's too bleak, it's too static, and it's too depressing. So you beat up on them, but you also make them actively attempting and able to do something to move toward what they want.
Interesting.
Yeah, I saw this note somewhere. Someone online, another blogger had said, "Don't be afraid to beat the donkey piss out of your characters."
Totally. I mean, if you look at a great movie or TV show, most of the time, most scenes, what you're seeing is the character that you're focused on in that scene is in hell. I mean, Liz Lemon on 30 Rock, constantly in hell. Michael Scott on The Office, constantly in hell. The characters on The White Lotus, constantly in hell. That might be one of the single biggest takeaways if a writer is looking for what's the one thing I can make sure I do if I remember nothing else from this hour or so, would be punish the characters, the main character more. Because we love seeing people, we're like sadists. We love seeing people with really terrible problems, as long as it's not bleak. Like I just said, as long as they're doing something and have some hope, however faint, of moving out of it, and they're making some progress, even though they're also having complications ensue as they try to solve it, which is the big key of the middle of the story, complications. The main character is trying to solve the problem, but as they do, they stir things up and they create complications. And even if they make some progress, they also create more stuff for them to do, which makes the story build and makes the story evolve and not stay static, as opposed to stutter steps where the main character tries action A to solve their problem, doesn't work. They start over, they try action B, it doesn't work. They start over, they try action C. In that approach, you could cut out any of those steps and the audience wouldn't miss it, because they're not changing the game of the story from scene to scene, which is what you want. Changing the status of the problem, affecting things in some way, which usually lead to a backlash and more now to have to deal with in some way.
Ramesh?
Someone ask, does the advice on slowly introducing characters in the first 10 pages apply to every genre?
Well, slowly introducing characters. Yeah, I know what you mean, because I just kind of like made this whole pitch about this. The main character, introducing them in a gradual way that shows us their normal life. Generally, I think does apply to all genres. It's not so much about you're introducing multiple characters. If you have a traditional movie where there's a single main character, you're really introducing that character only. The other people should be seen through the eyes of that character, through the experience of that character. So they're people that are either in the way or potential allies or love interests or people you have to convince to do something if you're the main character. So the audience is the main character and everyone else are the people we encounter as we move through the story as the main character. And so those secondary people, I know this wasn't exactly your question, but the secondary people, that's another big thing I noticed in early pages and scripts is people introducing a bunch of characters by name all at once, which is a big no-no because readers can't process and remember who those people are. It's much better to do them one by one and have that character do enough that's memorable so where the audience really gets who that character is and will remember them the next time they see that name. Not easy to do, but the key to doing it is you're not objectively introducing multiple people. You're subjectively portraying the experience of the main character. And as these other people show up in their world, in their scenes, playing a specific role in that character's life. It's a conflict-laden role, usually, right? Then we're like, oh, that's the character that is in love with him, but he wants to keep it a distance. That's the character that is his adversary and rival. And then it's easy to remember that role that they're playing. And we've seen them in dramatic moments that have some conflict, even those opening pages, so that they become the elements of the character's world. Because you're not just showing, literally their bedroom and their kitchen and their office. You're showing, most importantly, the people in their world, their relationships to those people and to their world of people, where they fit in the world, what they want, what bothers them, what they have to deal with from day to day, which is mostly going to involve interpersonal interactions. But yes, I don't see any genre where you bypass that, where you don't take the time to get the audience invested in the main character in those first 10 pages. What Save the Cat calls the setup section. To me, that's what the setup is mostly about, is that main character takes time to get the audience understanding enough and invested enough in that character before the catalyst happens or the inciting incident happens.
Okay.
Somebody's asking, I'm going to jump in here. Can you talk about the anecdote regarding writing about Alan Shepard from the Earth to the Moon, particularly writing for a subjective, emotional experience? Someone seems to be familiar with you, and it says it was an important lesson he learned.
Yeah.
I'm sure others here can learn from it.
Well, that's very nice. Yeah, I talk about it in the book. My first professional script written paid as a professional was an episode of From the Earth to the Moon, the HBO miniseries that Tom Hanks executive produced about the Apollo space program, where we dramatized all the other missions after the Apollo 13 movie had happened. The challenge was those missions tended to not be as dramatic as Apollo 13 because things went well, and we had to find the problem in each of those 12 episodes, which was not, easy. So I was given the opportunity to write one. I chose the Alan Shepard one because I liked the fact that it was about the subjective experience of one character with a problem. Alan Shepard was America's first astronaut to go into space in the Mercury program, but then he had this inner ear disorder that grounded him. So it looked like he was never going to fly again, but he became the boss of the other astronauts in their day-to-day administrative life. He ran the astronaut office, and they were all kind of scared of him because he was this intimidating figure who could mess with their ability to fly, if he didn't like them or whatever. And so, but meanwhile, he had this problem that he wasn't going to get to fly. So I liked it because he had this problem. It wasn't so much about, Apollo 12 has a problem, because none of those problems were anywhere near what Apollo 13 had. I was more interested in telling a human story. But as I wrote it, and I got so into the research and so caught up in the research, I was depicting objectively the events of his journey in a way that wasn't getting the audience caught up in his point of view in an emotional way enough. I shared the script with one of the other more experienced writers on the project, and he was like, I think you've got point of view issues. And then I looked at it through that lens, because he did end up getting his ear situation fixed. And then he commanded Apollo 14, which was the mission obviously right after 13 that was successful. And so it was about him having to deal with not being able to fly, and then eventually the challenges of once he's cleared to fly, what that mission was. And the problem was that mission didn't really have a lot of real problems to it. So the director of the episode was kind of like, really, the episode almost should end on the launch. Because once they successfully launch, or do a really quick epilogue of they landed and all went well. But of course, we were trying to document these missions and what specific things happened on each mission, and that was tricky to do that with that and with some of the other missions in a way that had enough conflict to it. So what I eventually had to really double down on was, what was it like for him to be grounded and to be the boss of the other astronauts, but not get to fly, which is what he really wanted to do, and spend most of the episode on scenes that would really show him dealing with that in ways that would make the audience care about him and identify with him in that situation. We're not looking at him from the point of view of the other astronauts, for instance, as the intimidating figure. We're more looking through him as the frustrated guy who should be landing on the moon, but instead is stuck in the office. And so the more I could write it that way, and even the mission stuff be about him fulfilling that dream and that potential to command a moon landing, the more I could write it that way, the more the script started to work for people.
Good question. Good answer.
Here's a question. What's your view on how to balance beating the piss out of a character and giving the audience what they want to see, and giving them an adequate payoff? He says, I like subverting the audience's expectations of how a character will or will not succeed, but I'm afraid of beating down the audience and then having the payoff feel like a page number convention rather than an earned resolution.
Okay. First of all, beating the piss was not my terminology.
Yeah, that's mine, sorry.
I think I said beating the crap.
Right.
The point is,
piss crap.
It's the donkey thing. It's that donkey.
It's the donkey piss.
It's a little hard to answer because it sounds like you're dealing with a very specific thing that I don't fully understand enough to be able to apply an answer to what you're talking about, Facebook user. Looking at your question here. But so balance of beating the piss versus giving the audience what they want to see, giving them a payoff. I'm not really sure I get the question in a way, because what they do want to see is the character getting the piss beaten out of them. That is what they want to see. So there's no balance between beating the character up and giving the audience what they want. Now, when you're saying giving them an adequate payoff, watching the character succeed, that's only at the very end. So there's no balancing involved. You beat the crap out of them for 95 minutes and you let them get what they want in the last 5 minutes. That's essentially how movies work, and TV episodes often too. If they're going to get a positive ending, it's going to be earned through the difficulty of getting the crap beaten out of them, but persevering and trying and continuing to slog forward despite it seemingly being impossible, and then crafting a final act, a final battle, a final challenging confrontation in which they have one last chance. And it's for all the marbles, and it's a championship game, and it's the last minute of the game, and they're behind 3 points, whatever, right? And so hopefully the audience will believe in that success at the end and not feel that there's some kind of weird problem with it if it's difficult and they earn it in a way that is believable. So the subverting audience expectation of how a character will or will not succeed, I'm not really sure what you mean by that. I have to look at your specific thing to understand. I'm afraid of beating down the audience. You're not beating them down when you're beating up the main character. The audience loves watching the character getting beaten down. That's the thing. That's what we want to see. If the characters aren't getting beaten down, we get bored. So you're not beating down them at all. You're giving them what they want and need if the character is getting beaten up. As long as they have that agency and that active pursuit with some hope where they are affecting the world of their story and moving it forward, then you're going to hopefully have the audience completely on your side. And then payoff as a page number convention. Yeah, it definitely, I agree. It has to be an earned resolution. As I said, that is key. It's hard to say more about how you do that other than yeah, you do want to do that.
Here's another one. How does comedy apply to the elements? And does your book address comedy?
Yeah, I mean, comedy is actually my first love, and the kind of scripts I tend to write and enjoy tend to be comedies, even though I'm best known for these dramatic historical miniseries. And so I believe this stuff works across genres. The main difference is in stakes. You know, some genres, thrillers, action movies, horror films have life and death stakes. Some dramas have life and death stakes. Comedy tends to not have life and death stakes. The stakes in comedy is more something like a romantic comedy. Will these two people who are right for each other figure it out and be together? Or will this person be able to rise up and have a chance at a better life that this opportunity is giving them? Or will this person be able to, you know, fix some problem in their life that isn't life and death, but feels life and death to them, but is kind of funny for us? So from the character's point of view, whatever their problem is really matters and has human emotional stakes we can all identify with. The stakes just may not be quite at the level they are in a comedy versus certain other genres, but they're appropriate for a comedy. And when you're watching a comedy, you don't want life and death stakes. You don't need them. You're happy with the stakes that are in play. But then all these problem elements are still applying. You know, the entertainment element, you're entertaining in a different way in a comedy than you are in Top Gun. You're entertaining by making people laugh instead of showing them planes, right? But it's still life-altering stakes. It's still punishing. It's still, you know, you want to still be believable, because comedy falls apart when the audience goes, I don't believe they would do or say that. The writer's just trying to make me laugh, but now I'm mad at the writer because they've taken me out of the story with their supposed comedy. That's always a risk with comedy. How do you make the audience laugh while having everything that happens be believable at the same time? It can be tricky.
So somebody's asking about films similar to The Power of the Dog, films that are perhaps more subtle. How do they hold up to The Problem?
Well, I haven't seen The Power of the Dog, but I imagine that maybe you would include movies like The Florida Project or Lady Bird. I was intrigued by Robert McKee wrote a blog post a few years ago about what he called one-act films. And I wrote a blog post about that as well, you know, referencing his and talking about my view of it. And a one-act film, I don't know how many people have seen The Florida Project. I imagine, I haven't seen Nomadland. I imagine it might fit in this category. There's certain kind of Oscar bait, critically acclaimed film festival artier type movies that aren't like big box office studio movies, but that if they're done really well can sometimes make a splash. That don't follow traditional 3-act structure and don't follow these problem elements the same way. I'm just going to use The Florida Project because it's fresh in my mind. The Florida Project is kind of almost like a documentary-like portrait of this like seedy motel near Disneyland where people live who are like basically one level away from homeless, and it focuses on this little kid, and her mother is really a difficult case who's like got drug issues and stuff, and the kid is like running wild with her friends and doing like crazy things that kids shouldn't be allowed to do and running into weird stuff. And it's kind of like it's documenting this situation, but you don't have a main character with a problem they're trying to solve in the way I talk about. So you don't have the same kind of problem, PROBLEM. You don't have 3-act structure. Again, I don't know Power of the Dog, but you don't have a character with a goal that they're trying to pursue the goal, or a problem they're trying to solve the problem. You do have characters with problems, and you usually are showing some really wild world that the audience is fascinated by, that has a lot of conflict inherent in the world and a lot of stakes, high stakes, and a certain vicarious thrill of seeing that world. But you don't have the normal 3 acts. So characters probably are punished somewhat. Certainly it needs to feel relatable and original, and there'll be some life-altering stakes. In terms of entertainment, the audience is more intrigued by their view into this weird world in those kind of movies, more than by a character trying to solve a problem. So most of the problem elements are still there in a different form. The main thing that's different is you don't have the traditional active efforts to solve a problem with a 3-act structure to it. You more have a sort of fly on the wall exploration of life situations that play out in a way that is a little less traditional narrative and more one act, as Robert McKee put it. I hope that answers your question, because I don't know Power of the Dog, but I'm imagining it maybe fits into that category.
You know, I think it's, of course, anytime anybody comes up with sort of a paradigm like this, everybody's always looking for the exceptions, which I always find is interesting.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And
yeah.
there are definitely always are
Sure,
exceptions. Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Other questions, Ramesh?
Yeah, Tanya wants to know, what are some of the mistakes that can make the main character less appealing? causing the writer or the script to lose the reader?
Well, one thing that I think of as a mistake that's the most common thing I think in this area is when writers are trying to write a character that's going to have an arc, and the arc is jerk becomes a nicer person at the end. The jerk often doesn't engage the audience and make them want to follow them in the first act. So while there are some movies, some stories, classic stories like A Christmas Carol or the movie Liar Liar, which are all about a really nasty person who some magical event is going to force them to look at the error of their ways and change at the end, that's a very specific and rare type of story. And I would say 99% of movies, the character arc is not jerk to nice person, selfish person to more selfless person, because you'll fail to get the audience wanting to follow the character or relate to them if they're too much of a selfish person in the first act. So, if you besiege them with enough problems, beat them up enough, sometimes you can get away with a certain amount of unlikability for sure, but the audience is relating to them because of the problems and not so concerned about the unlikable aspects, because the problems are so big that you can't help but relate, even though this person is not the nicest person. But what I often see is scripts where the problems aren't that big, but the main character also isn't likable because the audience, the writer's trying to make them likable at the end. I think of the flaw for a main character that creates the arc that in the end they're going to go on this journey, this character arc. I think it's better when you think of the main character as living their life in a limited way, a self-limiting way, have a limiting view of themselves and life and the possibilities, leading them to not be living their best life in some way. And in the end, that's going to change. Now, does not living their best life affect other people in their world? Yes, to some extent. This is something I might disagree with John Truby about, because I think he feels there always has to be a strong affecting people in a negative way aspect to the main character in the beginning of the movie. And I don't think it always is that they're absolutely doing that, but in not living their best self, you could say they're denying the world the best version of themselves. They're probably not being the most loving, the most, good person, likable person. But that doesn't mean they're a jerk. It probably just means they're suffering internally. I like Michael Haig's stuff about this in writing screenplays that sell. He talks about we all have an identity and an essence, and the identity is the outer mask, the outer presentation to the world, and even the ego's idea of what we are, that's based on past experiences that wounded us in some way and that showed us that we have limited possibilities and that we have to live in a certain way in order to get by in the world. But that way isn't our most self-actualized, highest spiritual, most loving and lovable way, because we have been wounded and we don't believe in that, or we don't want to try to risk being that way, or don't think that will work anymore. And so it's based in psychology, that the events in the story cause the main character to start to question that identity, or have that identity not work anymore, or that identity be probed and challenged often by the B story character or a love interest character, so that in the end, they end up having to confront that identity and change it and live more from their essence, which is a positive outcome in the end, that the audience feels a satisfying character arc that's been healing for that person has happened. It probably also means they're a somewhat better person in the world. But again, if you start them off as just a selfish person who is traditionally unlikable because you want that to change, I think that can often be a recipe for people don't get invested in the story.
What Liar Liar does so cleverly and in a very simple way is that he has a young son who we identify with. And there's this little boy who loves his dad and wants to see the better side of his dad. And that's really why we root for Fletcher in that movie. If that little boy character were not in the movie, we still have this great high concept, but we would really be missing that emotional element, the thing that really makes us root for him and want to see him change to make his son happy.
Well, also, he's a good dad when he's with them. He's a really good dad when he's with them. He loves him. He just doesn't show up when he said he would often and disappoints him, which is terrible. But when he's there, you're like, oh, he loves him and he's a good dad. So you know, and then you compare Carrie Elway's, the new boyfriend, who isn't as natural with the kid, and you're like, oh yeah, we want this kid to have his dad, and because the dad's a good dad if he can just get past his lying and his certain sleazy elements in his life.
Right. And meanwhile, of course, he's working on a case that involves a little bit of child custody, especially in the third act. It's actually a very tight script and great unity in it as well. And just thinking about the idea sort of thoroughly all the way through, those writers, one of whom is a member, by the way, of the Inside Pitch.
Really?
Yes. Did you know that, Ramesh?
No, I didn't.
Who's that?
Yeah. Paul Guay. I don't know if he's here today, but he's
great script, Paul.
It is. We love it. And because again, like that's a movie that just sort of clicks all the boxes, I think, in regards to just writing a commercial screenplay. Plus, of course, you've got Jim Carrey, who I love. Somebody asked in regards to if you have several characters, let's say it's an ensemble piece, or maybe it is a TV series where you spoke earlier, would you apply the problem to each story for each character?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I could go on, but yes is the answer. And that makes it harder to write an ensemble because you're doing this hard works 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 times in essence.
Right. And often you don't have the real estate in order to explore it. So you've got 7 or 8 characters and you don't necessarily have the time to really portray and explore the problem in any substantial way. Ensemble scripts are very, very tricky. Very tricky.
And sometimes, like, speaking of White Lotus, because I see someone posted about White Lotus, I didn't read the full post, but like sometimes in a series like that, that's a limited series, it's like, it's not so much that every character begins the series with a clear goal and they're going to spend the whole 8 hours trying to reach that one goal. It's more that all those characters have some sort of problematic life situation that is plaguing them and that is going to continue and build throughout. They're not necessarily actively like taking steps to get to the thing. They're more reeling from the problem, and the problem is kind of getting worse, and nothing that they do helps, and it doesn't, it builds, in a very dramatic fashion. Later in the season, things get, higher and higher in stakes.
Specifically what Deborah was talking about, I'm just going to read this off my phone. In a postscript with Mike White, he says he didn't know if something has happened or not in scenes, though the characters still had fulfilled arcs. I'm addressing writers stressing out with too much detail, and can it weigh down the idea?
Well, I think what he's talking about, and I don't want to give away for people that haven't seen the second season, which I love both seasons myself, but what he's talking about, I think there are a couple of suggested things that may or may not have happened in like the finale, specifically where did these two people sleep together? Is this person telling the truth? It looked like they maybe were about to, but we don't know what exactly happened with that. And that's like his choice to leave certain things slightly up in the air, but you still have clear, resolved arcs and relationships for those characters. And they're despite the fact that there are certain things that we're not 100% sure what happened at a certain key moment, but it doesn't affect the ability of the script of the stories to clearly resolve in the ways that he wants to resolve them, in ways that are satisfying but keeps the audience wondering a little. So I wouldn't say it's writers don't have to stress out about details. I don't. That's not the lesson I would get from that. I mean, yeah, writers do tend to focus sometimes too much on details and not on the larger picture idea stuff. Absolutely. I mean, that's the sort of main message I have is get the idea right. Is probably going to take longer than you think and take more ideas that didn't work than you wanted before you get to one that's really ready to write. That's for sure. But as you're doing that, there are some details that you do have to deal with. How am I going to make it punishing? How am I going to make it sure it builds and it's life altering, et cetera, et cetera? You're probably not dealing with scene level detail when you're working on the idea. You're working on bigger picture overview of what's going on in the story. So if you're asking, does the fact that he didn't know if certain things happened meant that writers can get away with not knowing what happens? I wouldn't say that's a lesson. I wouldn't say try this at home, that that's a lesson that applies generally. I think it's a very specific situation he's talking about that happens to work there, but most of the time in most scripts, it's not something I would say, yeah, don't know what happens to certain characters or if things happen or not, and that's fine. Most of the time, that's probably not going to work, is my opinion.
So we're going back to this beatdown again because people are just beating down. And so Caesar's talking again, sort of asking, and I feel like you totally answered this question.
Right.
So, I'm just going to, for the sake of one of our members, Caesar's talking about Game of Thrones. It stayed with me in an eye-opening way when watching Game of Thrones with my wife, how at a certain point she just quit on the show, having had enough of being set up for Jon Snow to do or become this or that, and then not achieving that and getting beat down some more. Is there not a risk of losing at least a part of the audience when a character gets beat down so much? That's my fear. I do want to give the character a resolution, but I'm afraid my predilection for putting him through the darkest hell first may be put off a part of the audience before the resolution comes, especially in the context of streaming rather than sitting in a theater.
Well, there's a lot of things there. I mean, it's hard to know without knowing the specific story and what it is you're doing to beat them down. And I wasn't a big Game of Thrones person, so I can't respond to the specifics of the Jon Snow of it all that you're talking about. But what I would say is that it is connected to what I said before. It's like, I don't think there's a danger in beating down the characters too much as long as they have agency and they are acting to try to resolve their problem. And when they act, they do affect it in some way so that there's some hope and there's some movement and the game of the problem is changing from scene to scene. Now, different people like different genres, right? So I'm not a horror film lover, so that form of beating down characters, I don't really enjoy watching. So there's that kind of taste issue. And you're not writing a script that's got to appeal to every single person who likes certain genres, right? Or doesn't like certain genres or has a certain level of taste or whatever. So there's always the thing of someone might get turned off by watching a certain kind of character getting beaten up. Even if it does it the way I'm talking about doing it, it's still not going to please everyone. Some people might be like, I just don't like fantasy action movies. It's too violent for me, or it's not fun to watch. I don't like how it looks visually. There's a million reasons why someone might get like turned off by something. That doesn't mean it isn't working in terms of what we're talking about, or that you shouldn't do the things that we're talking about. But when you talk about beating up your character so much and you're afraid it's going to like be problematic for the audience, to me, that I don't know the specifics, but usually that's not problematic unless some of these things I've already said are the case, which make it not fun to watch. At the end of the day, the audience is supposed to have fun watching it. At least the audience that likes that genre and would be the right audience for that movie, they've got to enjoy it. It's like candy watching the movie. So getting beaten up is entertaining. It's not the opposite of entertaining, but only if you do it in the right way, right? Which certain kinds of being beaten up, like if you literally just watch a person being bludgeoned with a blunt object, lying on the ground bloody, that's not fun to watch. But in terms of what the main problem of the story is, it's not necessarily literally being beaten, but like they're trying to achieve something and it's hard, but they keep trying and it keeps changing, but it's really hard. That usually is fun to watch. And different genres do it differently. And some people may just not like that genre, or may just be sick of seeing that same thing over and over for 20 episodes or whatever. And so that could be a reason why she checked out, but it isn't a commentary on their storytelling. But if I'd seen those episodes and could tell you, maybe it is because of them not doing some of the things that I'm recommending here.
I also think a lot of times, especially new writers, they're so precious about their protagonists that they don't want them to come into any harm or suffer or whatever. I see that a lot in the scripts I read. And I've had conversations with these writers, and they're like, well, yeah, but, like, no, put them through hell.
Well, there are ways of protecting your character, and then there are ways sort of
Right.
not protecting them. And I think that what Erik's talking about is dead on right. You want to beat up your character. And of course, it's very important to stress that that's not a literal.
Right, exactly.
Right, again, which is what Erik just said. So I'm merely reiterating that. It doesn't mean that, you're going to bludgeon or pummel people. It means that you're just finding ways within that world, within the genre and tone, to beat up your character. So if it's a legal drama like The Verdict, then you're going to beat up Paul Newman at every single turn. He gets a witness, and then his witness is bought off, for example. That's beating up the character.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and I don't get the protecting the character thing. I mean, that sounds like you're trying to be nice to your character.
Right.
And my thing is, think about the audience, not the character. What is getting an audience of millions of strangers paying to watch this movie? What do they care about? What do they want to see? Yeah, they want to see the character succeed in the end usually, but succeed at something that was so difficult, and so beating up of the character along the way. But that doesn't mean the character isn't taking action and isn't trying to find a way to move through it. Of course they are. Again, I liken it to sporting events. If you're a sports fan, if your team is winning every game by 20 points and is undefeated, you get bored and you stop watching at a certain point. You want to see them tested. Yeah, you want them to win in the end, but the best game is the game where they're behind and it goes into overtime and their best player gets injured and things don't go their way. And then they have a buzzer beater if it's basketball at the end. That's the best game for a fan of a team. Some people might say, no, I just want them to win by 20 points because I get too stressed otherwise. There are people like that. But I think if you watch game after game like that, you just stop watching. So you want to see your character who you're rooting for struggle because you're vicariously living through that struggle. You don't have to go through the struggle, but them going through it and you identifying with it is the fun of watching stories, I think.
I think when you hear the term protecting the character, they don't mean protect the character from a beating. They mean be sure to keep the character identifiable. Protect the character that way. I'll get that note sometimes from my clients who will come back and say, yeah, I don't really like this guy. So this is an actor who's saying, yeah, I don't really know if I want to play this character. Could we perhaps make him a little more identifiable? Maybe just tweak this or tweak that. Yeah. That's different.
Totally different. Yeah. That's relatable versus punishing. So my PR, you want to punish them while keeping them relatable. So you protect their relatability by making them someone that people can identify with. Usually that means likable, not always, flawed, but likable maybe, or even not that likable, but the problems are so big you can't help but identify anyway. You can't help but relate anyway.
Yes. Christine Owens. I love Chris. Hey, Christine. She's asking, what are ways you create intrigue? How to create intrigue in a story?
Wow, that's a broad question.
Very broad.
I don't know that I have a great answer for that. Oh, how do you create intrigue? I mean, there's different kinds of intrigue. There's suspense intrigue where like the audience knows there's a bomb under the seat and the character doesn't, and well, it's like a certain kind of tension. But I mean, to me, intriguing just means the audience wants to know more and wants to see what's going to happen, or something surprising in an entertaining way is happening that makes them go, oh, how's the character going to react to that now? It all comes down to the way the problem evolves. And the forces of opposition are taking action against the main character, whether it's a single antagonist or not, so that the actions they take, we don't see coming. We're the main character, right? So we don't see them coming. And when they come, it's like, oh no, but it's also, wow, that's intriguing. That moves the story in a new direction. There's new stuff for the character to have to deal with. I often point to the pilot of the original X-Files as a great example of mystery storytelling, and how even though from scene to scene, Scully and Mulder are getting more information and more clues, which seems like, oh, that's a positive arc towards success. Doesn't seem like beating up when you talk about it that way. Each clue they get, each new piece of information unlocks new questions and new challenges that are that much more befuddling or difficult for them. So you want to give little hints of something, but not just solve it for them, right? And so it's complicating. So it's intriguing. That's in a mystery, which is a very specific genre, but intriguing revelations like, oh, a piece of information that now sets us down a whole different path that makes us go, well, what could this mean? Or what's going to happen now? Or if that's true, then blah, 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 blah. So the audience and the main character, who should be usually in lockstep in what they're thinking and feeling, is like, now we have this new area to go down and I want to see what's going to happen. That's my best way of answering the intriguing question.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to questions, which is that's really what a screenplay is. You're asking questions. It's question after question after question. Even the problem is a question, which is, will the protagonist solve the problem? It's a question. And so the more questions that the script raises, then the more intrigued we are, because we stick around to learn the answer to these questions. Sometimes a question is raised in a scene and it's answered at the end of the scene. Sometimes it's raised in a scene and it's answered 10 scenes later, or maybe not until the end of the movie, maybe even after the climax and the resolution. And I was just watching, I don't know, one of the Rocky movies not that long ago, and Apollo Creed says something to Rocky about you're gonna owe me something, you're gonna owe me, like some kind of favor. And he's like, oh, what favor? What favor, Apollo? What are you doing? And so that question is raised. And then after the movie's over, after the climax, we get the resolution and we see that they're going to do this private rematch together. That's the answer to the question. So you're constantly asking questions through a script, and which is exactly everything that Eric just said. And that's what keeps us intrigued, provided that we find the questions to be interesting.
Yeah.
Ramesh?
Agreed.
In your book, can you talk a little bit about getting serious feedback on the idea? You do sort of touch on that.
Yeah.
And since the book is called The Idea, before launching into writing it.
That's the tricky thing, is like, obviously you can hire someone like me who does consulting and run your idea past a professional. But other than that, it can be hard because friends and family, even if they're kind of in the business, will usually not shoot down your ideas. Your agent will, or your manager if you have one. But if you don't have one, what do? It's hard to get around. Like, you have to hire someone because you may not have access to people in the industry who know enough to be able to really speak to whether they think your idea works or not. And so if you happen to know such people, and they're, maybe fellow writers who are willing to be blunt, but even then, you don't want to hurt your friends' feelings. So you're always going to soft pedal it compared to what the world will do, the industry would do, strangers would do, managers, agents, producers would do. So people well usually aren't going to be able to shoot down your ideas and aren't going to shoot them down. They're going to try to find a way to make it work, because that's just the friendly thing to do. Whereas your agent will say, nope, what else you got? So, Blake Snyder in Save the Cat talked about, he would like talk to strangers in coffee shops. Would you like a movie about whatever? And you pitch the log line, you look at their eyes. Not everybody is like Blake Snyder, right? I would never do that. He's like an extrovert, I think, or he was, rest in peace, Blake Snyder. But, he's just like going to average people, and he would run it past multiple people and somehow was able to read their expression to get a sense of what wasn't working. Then he'd go back to the drawing board. That can maybe work for some people. But I think the biggest thing is, get professional feedback on ideas rather than wait to have a finished script and then submit it to places and spend $500 or whatever, because it's the most important part. But be prepared for the fact that when you do that, just like me with my agents at CAA, 19 out of 20
boo!
19 out of 20 times they're gonna not be into it, or they're gonna tell you what their notes are, and they're significant notes. that make you go back to the drawing board. And nobody wants that. Everybody wants to work on an idea and then have it be embraced or just go write it. But then they go write it. And like what Chris said at the beginning happens, which is, wow, if Chris had been there at the beginning, or if I had been there, whatever, an agent, whatever, they would have said, well, here's the issue with this idea, I think. So getting that feedback is important. Where to get it, how to get it for free is the tricky part.
Well, that's what we do a little bit in our Facebook group with log lines, and people will throw out log lines and we'll try to tease them out a little bit, ask questions, or just overall, if it's interesting or not. Is this something that grabs you? And often the answer is no. I mean, honestly, the majority of the log lines that I see in our group don't they need this book.
They're not movies.
They're not movies. I don't know what they are. They're not poems. They're not emails. I don't know. They shouldn't even be written. But that isn't a bad thing. I'm not trying to be insulting. That this, it's trial and error. It's about having 30, 40, 50 ideas, and maybe a couple of them are worth turning into screenplays. But I think the problem is that I meet so many writers that they literally, like, an idea pops into their head and then they go off and write it. And they don't stop to think about it. They don't tease it out at all. And then they get to midpoint and they're stuck. And then they just keep writing the script anyway.
Yeah.
And it's apparent, even just from a log, it's apparent from a log line. Yeah. If an idea has potential. So it's at least a good place to start, because you don't even have to do that much work with a log line. And or even if it's just a concept, and then you can try to create the log line from there. But again, trying to tease stuff out, trying to test it, going to the problem, the PROBLEM, and looking at each of those. I think it's important. I mean, how much is this book? $12 on Amazon or something, right? I mean, it's not like it's $40, $50. Don't be cheap. Go out and buy the damn book. Read it.
And the Kindle version is cheaper too. So
look at that. Come on.
And there's an audio version read by the author. So
and you have such a pleasant voice, Erik. I'm going to listen to it when I'm in bed at night. Any other questions, Ramesh?
No, I think we've sort of run through them.
All right. So I am going to thank Erik. This has been great. Yes, I'm glad that we got to touch upon and talk about the idea. How do people reach you?
Oh, so my website, which is Flying Wrestler, flyingwrestler.com. It's explained why in a post on my blog, but is the one-stop place where you have years of blog articles for free about all these different issues in the book. And I have an online course based on the book where I also do logline feedback on discussion boards and in live video sessions. Yeah, all my stuff you can see right there at Flying Wrestler.
All right. And listen, it's worth a visit just to find out why it's Flying Wrestler.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I think this has been really instructive. And Erik's book, of course, has a whole lot more. By the way, I don't get a cut of this book. I am merely promoting it because I just think it's such a simple, it's not some, arduous Robert McKee read. It's a nice, simple, clear cut, and very accurate book on how to test your idea, how to formulate and test your idea. And since a lot of people do work in a vacuum, this is perhaps a really, really good start. And it, $12 or whatever it is, and less on Kindle. It's a lot less than probably even hiring Erik. Sorry, Erik.
Yes, it is.
All right. So there you go. So you can always start with the book. And then if you wanted to get one-on-one with a 2-time Emmy Golden Globe winner, then you go to flyingwrestler.com. Congratulations on those awards. And we love seeing the little Emmy back there. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I'm going to post more information about Sarah Elizabeth Timmons' webinar just a little bit later today. And Thank you again, Eric. We, can't thank you much for taking 2 hours out of your Saturday. To meet
My
with us. So
pleasure.
thank you.
My total pleasure. It's been fun. Thank you, Chris, Ramesh, and everybody who's showed up today or who is watching this at some point in the future. Hope you found it valuable.
Thank you, Eric.